And so each month is anchored in one of our Science of Mind principles. The principle for this month comes from the Science of Mind textbook, written by our founder, Ernest Holmes. The divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. All instinctively feel this. The truth points to freedom under law, and thus our inherent nature is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. We would do well to listen to this inner voice, for it tells us of a life wonderful in its scope, of a love beyond our fondest dreams, of a freedom for which the soul craves. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. The experience of freedom is absolutely vital in our goal of creating this world that works for everyone and where everyone thrives. When I was a teenager, one of my favorite things to do after school was to watch the Star Trek reruns on TV. I was a little young for Star Trek when it first came out in 1966, and so it wasn't until I was older that I could watch it. My little brother and I would come home from school and we would just devour the episodes that were shown on from its 3-year run. We were ardent Trekkies. We could quote all the good lines from Jim and Spock and Bones and Scotty. But the thing I loved most about Star Trek was the eclectic group of individuals who worked on the Starship Enterprise. For me, in the early 1970s, it was amazing to see someone from China working alongside someone from Russia, someone from Africa working with someone from Scotland. All of these individuals working alongside others from different planets, the Vulcans, the Andorians, and so many more interesting people, all of them working for a common goal. And when the Star Trek movies started coming out a little later, they took us back to Earth in the future. And I witnessed for the first time the concept of a world without borders. A world where it didn't matter what country you were born in, where you were educated, what you looked like. Race and gender and religion and political beliefs were no longer used to divide people. People were free to live out their fullest expression of their lives, free to be their authentic selves, free to do the work they were called to do, and to love the people they were destined to love. People were judged on their skills and their content of their character. Now, I know it might seem idealistic, but to me this was very compelling, this notion of a world without borders. The history of freedom in our world is fascinating, to quote Mr. Spock. In the early Chinese dynasties, freedom was experienced by one single individual. Only the emperor was free. In medieval times, freedom was the right of a few aristocratic noblemen. When America was young, full access to freedom was only granted to landowners. And throughout most of the world's history, at least up until the last 100 years or so, half of the human population, all of us who are female, experienced very little freedom over any aspect of our lives. The German philosopher George Hegel describes freedom as our worthiest and most sacred possession. He makes the distinction that freedom is not merely the unrestricted ability to do whatever we like. He calls this type of freedom negative freedom. But freedom is a consciousness, a way of living that has its roots in spirit and is achieved through self-actualization and reconciliation. He says this kind of freedom is realized through the commitment to and the virtues of living an ethical life. The ethical life is the idea of freedom as the living good, the birthright of every living soul, which has its knowledge and its volition in self-consciousness and is achieved through self-conscious action. You know, it would be nice to think that our borders, these artificially drawn lines in the sand, have created greater freedom in the world. And I suppose it has for some, and at some periods of time. It has especially benefited those who wanted to keep the resources on their side of the border and deny access to them to other people. In 1883, a group of a European elite met in Berlin and divided up the entire continent of Africa, creating artificial borders that had never existed before. I just have this visual image of it, this group of people sitting around divvying up the loot because they believed that might was right. And being so sure of their superiority, they created these artificial boundaries with no concern for the people who lived there. When the astronauts look down upon our world, they don't see borders. What they see is a sweeping view of the planet in all of its magnificence. Many of them have reported that they experience a sense of interconnected global consciousness while gazing upon the beautiful blue and green sphere that is our planet. There's a reason they cannot see those borders. All of these barriers, these human-drawn international political boundaries, are artificial and don't show up when they're viewed from a distance. So what causes us to want to divide up our world? You might say it's because we want to experience freedom, but I think it's more along the lines of we don't want to experience fear. So we create an artificial boundary, a line in the sand, and we say, this is mine and that's yours. And then we do everything we can to protect our side of the line from what we fear is on the other side. This past year, I've been traveling to Mexico frequently. And I've had a wonderful time in central Mexico getting to know the people and the culture there. What has been most surprising to me in all of my travels is the reaction that I have gotten from people on this side of the border. I always get a lot of questions about it, and almost all of the questions are based on some stereotype or some perceived fear of what I might be experiencing on the other side of the border. And it really doesn't seem like I can do much to alleviate that fear either. No matter how I answer the question, based on the reality of the experiences I've had there, I'm still getting questions about concern over my safety. I have not experienced any catastrophe. I have not ever felt threatened or in danger. But I keep getting questions about, oh my goodness, is it safe to be there? Can you drink the water? What's happening here? Are the cartels active? I mean, all of these questions that are fear-based, because based on just things that we've heard, and not anything that anybody's experienced in reality, but just based on fear. It's fascinating. So if fear is what is causing us to divide up our world, then what is the solution? The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace offers these proactive strategies to counteract the fears that we have created around other people. The first thing they say is that we should begin to improve the communication channels that we have and create forums of dialogue so that we can begin to know each other. This reminded me of the reconciliation commissions that South Africa held after apartheid and that Canada held for the First Nations people. Get to know the people, hear their stories, understand what other people go through, and we alleviate some of the fear that we have. Another thing we can do is practice empathy and compassion to reduce the long-held prejudices and biases that are based on stereotypes. And maintain respectful interaction with others through nonviolent communication. Another thing we can do is take the opportunity to work on projects together. Building a level of trust by doing something together is a powerful way to begin to understand people. And then finally, find the middle ground. Find those things that we have in common. Find how we are similar instead of different. And we begin to lessen the fear that we have through our understanding of what is. Now, these strategies are straightforward, but they can be challenging to implement. It takes courage and perseverance to overcome any resistance that we feel based on our fears. The fears have been there for a long time. They are societal. It's that race consciousness that Ernest Holmes talks about. Things that we don't even know are operating in our lives, but they're very active and they're there. We always have an opportunity to take the time to get to know people living on the other side of the border. You may be surprised by what you find. I love the way the poet Edgar Guest put it. You seldom hate a fellow when you know him very well. You seldom have fear about others when you get to know them. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. Every living soul. As the dominant species here on this planet, Homo sapiens have, for the most part, only looked at freedom as a human right. Historically, we've given very little consideration to the world around us, except to decide how it benefits us. But if we are creating this world that works for everyone and all of creation, we need to take a look at what we're doing to the rest of the world. It is often said that no one will be free until everyone is free. I believe this idea of everyone extends itself into nature as well. And I'm not sure we'll ever be truly free as long as we hold our natural world captive to the whims and the desires of the dominant species, we humans. I believe our experience of freedom is hindered by our belief in our own superiority, in the belief that our rights and needs outweigh those of the animals and plants and natural environment we all share. Now, I fully realize that we need plants and animals to survive, that we inhabit the natural environment. But I do believe we could all develop a little more consideration toward them and begin to exist in a way that is more humane, more ethical, and more compassionate. And I know that this is becoming increasingly more important as our population grows and we begin to take up more space and more natural resources. The great Albert Einstein wrote, "Our task must be to free ourselves by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty." Widening our circle of compassion. There have been a few evolved souls who treated the natural world compassionately. One of them that comes to mind is St. Francis of Assisi, who not only refused to eat any animal, but he would not eat any plant products until they had actually fallen to the ground. He considered plants and animals to be of equal worth as humans. A compassionate soul. One who is dedicated to creating a world that works for everyone and everything. There is a branch of biology called compassionate conservation, and it's based on the universal belief of, first, do no harm, and that all individual life matters. Biodiversity is fundamental to survival. All aspects of life should be included in decision making, and that there can be a peaceful coexistence between all species. Compassionate conservation stresses the need for biodiversity, and biodiversity is necessary to sustain any functioning ecosystem, and therefore is necessary to sustain all life. Oftentimes we do our best to eliminate species based on our own needs, based on our own thoughts, based on our own beliefs. But the compassionate conservation approach removes the practices that intentionally and unnecessarily harm wildlife individuals. It's committed to conservation in a more ethically expansive way that incorporates the recognition of the intrinsic value of wildlife, the sentience of non-human animals, the way that they actually think and feel, and the value of all ecosystems and biodiversity contained within each system. A paradigm shift in how we approach other life is vital because of what we're beginning to understand about the cognitive and emotional capacities of other animals, and to some extent plant species. We are beginning to see how other animals are thinking, how other animals are feeling, how other animals are reacting to the things that humans have done to their environment. Compassionate conservation offers a bold, inclusive, and forward-looking framework to promote a future whereby humans, wildlife, and nature can all flourish, where we can all coexist. Balance, harmony, and freedom for all to thrive. When we stop dividing up the world and stop thinking about them and us, we actually begin to create a world without borders. A world where all species are considered important, where balance and harmony and mutual respect coexist, where biodiversity is celebrated, and where the desire to be compassionate overrides the desire to dominate. This is how everyone can experience a true sense of freedom. And this is how we create a world that works for everyone and all of creation. So let's take this into prayer. This is our opportunity to sit back and recognize the truth as we feel it welling up inside of us. And so right here and right now, I only see one. I only feel one. I only know that there is one power, one presence, one creative, loving intelligence. I know that that one shows up in a multitude of forms. It shows up as everything that has ever existed and everything that is yet to be. For there is nothing but this one. And I know that this one exists as balance and harmony. I know that it is the flow of life moving through all creation, manifesting itself as everything that has ever been created. I know that that one resides right in the heart of my being, and therefore I know it resides in the heart of everyone else, and that we are all united in this consciousness of one. And so I speak this truth, knowing that there is only this one life, knowing that we can never be separate from it. I know that there is no need to create artificial barriers to promote any one species over the other. I know that the life that we are living here is one of harmony and balance, that each and every species that inhabits this beautiful blue and green planet does so because it is divinely orchestrated to be where it is in this time and this space, functioning fully and perfectly as a representation of that one. And so I know that there is no need to fear the other, because there is no other when we are united in this consciousness of one. Differences are celebrated, not feared, and all of life is respected. And I just give great thanks for this feeling that is welling up inside of me as I speak these words. of truth. I give great thanks for the action and the activity of all those beloved individuals committed to creating a world that works for everyone and all of creation. And I release this word into the law, into that creative part of spirit that always says yes, knowing that it comes back fully fulfilled. I let it be, and so it is. Amen.